So there was a bill introduced, I don't know, maybe a month ago that was just straight up on its face Medicaid expansion repeal. And that kind of went over like a lead balloon. We got 1,000 emails saying don't do this. So what they did is they brought in this bill 138, which was marketed as a reform bill. But let us be clear, it is a straight up repeal bill. The one that was the big kahuna today that we were in there for, I think, more than 3 hours with lots of testimony. I mean, hundreds of people signed up. And it was marketed as a reform bill, but it was actually a repeal bill.
Okay.
It was just kind of, repeal in reform clothing. But what this bill was...
If I may ask, okay, you're telling me. Okay,
Yeah.
why is it a repeal?
It's a
reform?
trigger bill that says, unless you can do these 11 things, Medicaid expansion goes away. So it says that the default is, unless you can leap through these 11 rings of fire, Medicaid expansion will be repealed. But when you look at these 11 things, they are completely infeasible. Most of them are illegal. Some of them have been requested before and were turned down by both the Trump administration and the Biden administration. If they ever were granted, they would go to court because they're clearly not compliant with the Affordable Care Act. Some of them require federal courts to reverse themselves. It's just a series of things that are completely implausible. I would liken it to basically, unless I can fly a unicorn to the moon and back in 24 hours, then Medicaid expansion is repealed.
Farting rainbows the whole time.
Exactly.
Okay, can you give me an example of one of the things that you're like, you can't do that, that's illegal?
Yeah, there's a number. Well, so one of them is a court one. It says that if any court says that transgender treatments and, hormone treatments must be covered by Medicaid, then Idaho's Medicaid expansion gets repealed.
And is that any courts in the nation?
Yes, most of them. That has already been ruled on by federal courts, including by the very conservative Fourth Circuit Court, which covers like West Virginia and South Carolina and some pretty red states. So that is the law, according to federal courts, is that if you are transgender and you're on Medicaid, they have to give you your hormone therapy treatments. So basically, one of the things is that the federal courts would have to reverse themselves in order for us to keep Medicaid expansion. No reason to think that's going to happen. We have no control over that, totally out of our hands. Some of the other things, it says that the feds would have to grant us a waiver allowing us to move everybody who's 100% of federal poverty line, between 100 and 138 of federal poverty line, we'd have to be able to move them to the exchange. That doesn't fly under the Affordable Care Act. It's not revenue neutral. It wouldn't be granted. It's already been turned down by the Trump administration and the Biden administration. No state has gotten that. There's absolutely no reason to think we would ever get that.
I'm sorry. What is revenue?
Yeah.
You got to talk to me like I'm five. You got to.
No, I don't, because you know everything. I know you.
Listen to me. So there's a discussion with look, we want to lower the threshold of income, or we want to essentially establish, look, if somebody's here at this income level, they're not going to be on Medicaid. They're going to go to the exchange. And the idea is, if we can take them off of Medicaid and put them onto the exchange, we could purchase a private plan on the exchange for them for cheaper than what we're paying for the Medicaid, or analogous costs, something like that.
That's the theory.
That's the theory.
But it has never been granted because the numbers don't quite work out that way. When you move over to plans on the exchange, at that level of plan that you can afford, it would have a ginormous deductible. You'd be looking at like a $10,000 deductible that this person in poverty couldn't possibly afford.
Which was the whole nature of Medicaid in the first place.
Exactly.
If you're only making $25,000 and you have a $10,000 deductible, you in effect don't really have medical insurance aside from catastrophic, huge car accident or something.
Exactly. And then you would lose your house trying to pay the deductible. So it has to be, in order to get a waiver, you have to show to the feds that it's revenue neutral and provides the same coverage and all that. You can't do that with moving these folks from a Medicaid plan, which has no deductible, to a plan on the exchange. It just doesn't work. So this is why it's been turned down. We've had an appeal. We've had that request out since 2019. It has never been granted. Similarly, now maybe work requirements will be granted at some point. We've had that request out since 2019. It was turned down by the first Trump administration and by the Biden administration. And it's not, there are a lot of problems around that one. It's actually very costly, surprisingly. It doesn't save you money. You'd think it would, but it really doesn't, because you end up having to hire all these people to police it and chase people down for the paperwork and confirm whether they are or aren't working. And actually, most of the people on Medicaid are working anyway, so you don't end up pulling very many people off of Medicaid. You just spend a ton of money policing it. So it doesn't save money, but it hasn't been granted by the feds, and we've been trying for 5 years. So
the idea was, okay, unless we get this work requirement, then it's off.
Yes, and that plus 10
got it.
other things. So the work requirement
Plus
is actually the easy one.
transgender ruling in federal courts in
Right.
states outside of Idaho that we can't affect, plus the work requirement that we also cannot affect because it's up to the Fed, plus the income threshold to show revenue neutral transition from Medicaid to private plan. So like just those three
Yes.
things, you're like, these are impossible because one, the numbers don't pan out. Two, we can't affect federal court. And three, we can't force the federal government to grant us a work requirement.
And there's 8 other equally impossible things. So that, again, you'd have to, send a 747 through the eye of a needle in order to be able to keep Medicaid expansion. So it is repeal. It is repeal. They want
brought
to
this one
fudge
forward?
it, but it's repeal. It was brought forward by Jordan Redmond. It was brought by an out-of-state, Republican think tank who is here. They're actually testifying for it. They flew their person in from... There I go with the hand talking and whacking microphones. But they flew the person in from the East Coast somewhere, from whatever, smoke-filled out-of-state room that hatches these things, and they're trying to shop it in all the red states. And so they try, but it is repeal. It's straight up repeal. We shouldn't fudge that.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Okay. I try to have a really awesome conversation with every single representative, senator, Idaho person that comes through my door. I really try. And I know I don't always hit the mark, but I was thinking today as I was grabbing coffee, because there was this guy in this really fancy suit at the coffee shop right in front of me. And I was like, he's got to be a lobbyist. We were at Dawson Taylor. I was like, he's got to be a guy. Right. And I have started thinking, it's okay, if I'm for Idaho, do I care about having an edgy conversation with an out-of-state lobbyist? What do you think? Should I lower my threat? Because for representatives or even Idaho people, it's listen, I'm here for Idaho. If you're an Idaho citizen worried about something, you come in here and you're listen, I'm worried about this thing. It's let's have this conversation. But for some dude from the East Coast, I don't care if it's a right issue or a left issue, but a lot out-of-state lobbyist that lands in my room, I feel like it should be daggers out.
I agree. It's driving me bananas. And things have changed so much since I started this, 10 years ago. It used to be that we would have bills driven by actual problems that the people of Idaho would have. A constituent would come to you and say, hey, I've got this problem. Can you come up with a bill to solve it? Which was great. And those were the days. I wish that's how we brought bills.
Right.
Now it is just nonstop onslaught from some dude from Virginia or Maryland or wherever who's got something that they're shopping and trying to shove down everybody's throat from coast to coast. And they're just coming into Idaho and saying, here's what you need, Idaho. You got to pass this bill. And that is where most of our bills are coming from right now. Most of the bills that we deal with are boilerplate that was cranked out from 3,000 miles away that nobody was asking for. And, then we're on defense because they got more money than we do. They got some slick communications operation. And we are trying to stand up for the people of Idaho against some often terrible idea that's getting shoved down our throat from across the country.
This is so wild. I was having a conversation with, again, Speaker of the House Mike Moyle yesterday, and he was talking about the concern that people have about the ballot initiative process with out-of-state manipulation. And it's okay, I understand that. People are worried about, and one thing that was really cool is hey, that initiative bill is looking to increase the threshold of voters to get something passed from 50 to 60%. And I asked him, look, do you know of any ballot initiative that passed that was bad, that was between that 50 and 60% threshold that would show this is this one passed at 56% and it was totally detrimental to our state. And that's a case, a perfect case study for why we need to increase it. And he said, he was don't quote me on this. I'm not a ballot initiative expert, but no, I don't. He said he didn't know of any. I was okay, fine. But I also wondered, okay, if we're going to have a conversation about checks and balances, about outside influence with regard to the ballot initiative process, what are we doing to stop the lobbyists coming to lobby for or against something with our representatives? Because you're saying that the citizens get manipulated, which I'm sure, I don't know anything about it. If he says a bunch of outside money came, we see it with every time primaries and generals come around. There are crazy, flyers that go out. That's a ton of that's outside money. So great, let's not have our citizens manipulated by that. But what about our elected representatives being hosed by the lobbyists?
Exactly. I mean, that is ridiculous to try to confine that discussion to ballot initiatives. We absolutely should, if that were the theory, we should absolutely have a 60% threshold on any voucher bill, because that is 100% being driven by out-of-state money.
I'm not advocating for changing the voting within the legislature. Right. I'm just saying,
well, why wouldn't we? If that's the logic, why wouldn't we?
Look, I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know what to do about lobbyists. Like, I understand people are saying, hey, this out-of-state money is manipulating our populace, and I agree with that. But like, what do we do about the out-of-state money that goes into the state house?
You're dead on. And way more goes into the state house than goes into ballot initiatives. And way more goes into just regular elections. I mean, I can point to 8 races where people lost the race because a tsunami of out-of-state money came in to attack them.
Sure.
I mean, it's driving half the bills that we're looking at right now are driven by some out-of-state think tank. And it's very frustrating that this argument is like, oh, there's out-of-state money, so we need to squash ballot initiatives. But not at all look at the fact of like, okay, there's out-of-state money completely infiltrating and contaminating our normal legislative process.
Right.
Nobody's saying we ought to do anything about that.
Well, I think Representative Moyle did mention like we have something there. I don't know all the details, but it is a question of mine. Anyway, so the bottom line is the Medicaid reform bill that came forward was dead on arrival if you want any version of Medicaid to continue existing. Now, what was the debate on the floor or within the committee today?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, there was a little bit of fudging to say, no, this isn't repeal. But I think by the end of it, everybody got that this was a repeal bill. But there were a lot of very, very right-wing people on that committee who want to repeal it. That is the Republican platform. If you signed your oath to the Republican Party platform, then you have pledged to end the Affordable Care Act, which includes Medicaid expansion. And there are a majority of members of that committee who have signed that pledge. So it wasn't a huge surprise. But let me tell you, the people, we had 265 people total that signed up either with written testimony or to testify in person, and that testify against this bill, to speak out against this bill. There were 8 in favor. So 265 to 8. And the committee went with the 8 over the 265. And this is, this passed with 61% support back in 2018. Since then, the polling's only gone up. It's got 73% support in the last poll I saw. People do not want Medicaid expansion repealed, but you would never know that from what happens in the legislature. But, lots of personal testimony on how important this was to people and their families and how they would lose all coverage without it. We had a lot of fiscal information, which was really interesting because part of the narrative around why they want to repeal Medicaid expansion is, oh, it's so expensive, we got to rein in the cost, out of control costs, blah, blah, blah. When you really look at the numbers, you will see that it will cost the average Idaho taxpayer more to repeal it than to keep it. And when you add it all up, there was this great economic analysis done by an economist from U of I who showed basically we're bringing in $1.5 billion of economic value a year through Medicaid expansion. It's yielding around $50 million a year in revenues to the state. We have $80 million of savings throughout the systems throughout the state. We would be looking at losing 9,600 jobs. It would be a huge economic hit and a hit to taxpayers. We would lose more in savings essentially and lost revenue collection than what we are laying out for the state's portion of Medicaid expansion.
Well, look, you just said a lot of things, and I caught like a third of them. I don't know anything about the economics of this. What I do know is that it cost Idahoans roughly $100 million. Yep. And for that $100 million, Idahoan, the state, gets roughly $1 billion worth of value in medical care.
Exactly.
Right? Because the federal government picks up the other $900 million. Now, some people have said they're very concerned about that 90% match going down to 80% or 70%. I understand that, but it's my understanding of right now as it stands today, not like this could happen in the future, but right now we pay $100 million and we get $900 million in value. So if that's where jobs come from, but like just that multiplying factor, it's like, that seems like a lot. Now, I don't know if that's the right thing to do, but like that seems like a 10x, we're getting 10x value on what we're putting in.
You are exactly right. That is what we should be looking at, and it is a screaming deal that we would be insane to turn down. And if someday the feds change it, we can have that conversation then, but right now, it's still 90-10. But, you're exactly right. We pick up about $100 million in terms of what we pay to cover it, but we get $80 million of savings in other parts of the system in terms of not having to have the catastrophic fund that used to have to cover uninsured people and savings.
Oh, yeah, because the state ultimately picks up a portion of that cost.
Of uninsured people.
Completely uninsured. So we eliminated an $80,000 line item by picking up $100 million. So the delta is really, if you just look at those two things, the delta is only $20 million.
But there's more, you're exactly right, but there's more than that, because as I said, there was this economic analysis that showed, because when $1 billion of federal money goes into the state, that fills our coffers in other ways. It makes jobs. People are paying income tax on that money. They're paying sales tax with the money that they get. It pays the doctors, it pays the nurses. They go buy stuff. They buy groceries and boats and whatever it is they buy. They pay income tax on it. So it yields, and they pay property taxes. So that billion we get in from the feds yields another 47 million in revenue to the state. So we've got 80 million of savings plus 47 million of revenue. So we're getting 127 million. So we're paying 100 million to get 127 million plus insure 100,000 people. We would be insane, just on a pure fiscal level, just putting aside all the human misery and the people that are going to die and not have their illness treated, just purely fiscally, we would be bonkers to walk away from Medicaid expansion, given the current 90-10 breakdown that we get from the feds.
Look, I'm a terrible person. Okay, so let's say I just sit here, I'm like, I don't care. Let people pull themselves up, by the bootstraps, you get a medical ailment, that's on you. I could still say, hey, if there's a machine where every year I can put in $100 million and I get $127 million back, like if Warren Buffett could do that, he would be I'd be all in. 27% return annually, year on year on year. At that point, I ask hey, if I give you $1 billion, can you make it $1,270 million?
Yes.
That's a great return, just the way. And again, maybe there are other aspects of it. This is not something that, Representative Moyle brought up. He was like, it's costing us $100 million and he's not a fan of it. It's like, okay. And he was bringing up the other aspects of it. But again, just from the information you're providing me, that sounds like a great return.
It is. So just purely fiscally makes zero sense. But beyond that, so let's just say you're, some meanie pants who doesn't really care if people are sick or insured or whatever, and you're just like, I just care about me and my family. It's going to hurt rich people who are on private insurance, because what happens is you've got these rural hospitals in areas where you have a lot of poor people, and they're going to have 40-50% of people showing up if we yank Medicaid expansion with no insurance whatsoever. And they're going to have to eat a lot of that cost. It was driving these hospitals out of business. They can't keep operating with 40-50% of people unable to pay their bills. So they start laying off doctors, they start scaling back operations, they start shutting their doors completely. That is no bargain for the rich people in the area, because no matter how rich you are and you have fabulous private insurance, if there's no hospital there and there's no doctor there, you are going to be hosed when you fall off a ladder or have a heart attack. So it really diminishes the quality of care for rich people too when we force these hospitals into closure. So, there's a million angles on this thing, but all of them are really clear that we should be keeping Medicaid expansion, and yet this bill to repeal it passed on an 8-7 vote out of committee today.
The doctors not getting paid and then eventually walking from the hospital that's a real huge problem. And people don't understand. And look, I'm not in the medical industry, right? I have family members are, but the paradigm shift is essentially, okay, look, somebody has to get out of bed at 2 a.m., go do an appendectomy, take your appendix out, or go do a gallbladder, life-saving operations, by the way. And they go and do this thing at 2 and 3 a.m. and the person they're working with doesn't have insurance. The idea that it's well, you're just going to have to swallow that for the gratitude of this job only flies for so long until people are it's 2 a.m. I don't want to do this. And the hospitals are not that. Classically, a lot of times what would happen is the hospital foots a portion of the bill and they get reimbursed from the federal government or the state government. They foot a portion of the bill and then they reimburse the doctors a little bit. The doctors aren't made whole completely. But the point is, you look at this whole thing, and when you realize if you're a physician and you're all right, I could go to hospital A, I could take call at hospital A and have the privileges of working at hospital A, but I'm going to be up at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. a couple times a week doing the stuff that I know I'm not getting reimbursed for. Or I just take call at hospital B, C, D, E, F, and I open my own private clinic and I'm going to get paid for sure. Hospital A goes out of business because they cannot field people to take call and do rounds in their hospital wings. That's what happens. And we can poo-poo on doctors for doing what all of us would do. Because I don't know the last time you showed up for work without getting paid, right? Consistently, right? This is basic economically driven behavior, which is if we can't get paid, we are not going to work here, and that's it, right? And these are real problems that it's my understanding at least some of these stopgap programs fill.
100%. And that is what was happening before we had Medicaid expansion. We had some of these smaller hospitals in rural areas closing. We were trying to rush in to stop the hemorrhaging, to stop them all from closing. And that was one of the big goals of Medicaid expansion, was to make sure we still had some hospitals left in those areas. States that never expanded Medicaid expansion, Mississippi has seen basically the closure of all of their rural hospitals. This is not a hypothetical. This is real. It has happened. It does happen. It will happen. And that's one of the big reasons why we did this, to stop it from continuing to happen. But we already have medical deserts in Idaho. We're not great. We have, I think we're 50th in the nation on doctors per capita.